Hello, everyone. This is part two of group therapy, the lecture on group therapy. For next class, I will be covering couples and family therapy, the other part of chapter 16. All right, so to continue with types of groups for group therapy, I'm going to go over different common types of groups. We will start with psychoeducational groups. These types of groups are focused on learning that the students or clients in the group will have some sort of learning happening. They're going to focus on learning new skills, learning different information, becoming more educated on a certain topic. Maybe it's, they're talking about depression and they're going to go over the different symptoms, the different ways to cope. Um, so these can be preventative, like stress management type of groups. So you're learning skills to deal with stress. Maybe you're not, in this case, under a lot of stress right now, but you want to learn skills for when you are. So that'd be a preventative group. Growth oriented, where they're focused on just general growth, or they might be remedial groups, where there's an issue and you're learning new skills. So an example of this might be like an anger management psychoeducational group where you're learning skills to deal with anger because you've been flagged as having some sort of anger problems. So again, the psychoed groups focus on skill building, giving the person information, educating them on certain topics. Support groups are groups that offer support. That would make sense with the name. They help people cope with various challenges, and they're often centered around a theme that the members share. So there could be a support group for people who are dealing with the death of a child. There could be a support group for domestic violence, experiencing domestic violence. There could be LGBTQ plus support groups. I've led both support groups for women who experience domestic violence. I've led support groups for LGBTQ individuals. And again, there's going to be some common themes that will be discussed because all the members are sharing this particular issue. They're not going to necessarily be giving a lot of information or educating them on certain things, but it's more to offer support, guidance, um, that people can feel they can turn to the other members when they're going through something rough. And it's more of just a shared space for individuals. The final type of group is true group therapy or counseling groups or psychotherapy groups. And these also often focus on an issue, but an issue that's recurring. So maybe there's interpersonal challenges or mental health issues um, that they need to be in a more structured environment. It's not just learning about what is depression, but they need to be able to um, really do more therapy. Um, and so this is the one that the therapist is going to be the most important in a way, and the group members are also really important. So therapy groups, group therapy uses the group process to help individuals change. These are, that they're relating to other group members and so on. And it's just a little bit more deep and formalized than support groups. If you compare them, psychoed groups, you might not even talk to your neighbors. You might not even talk to the other group members very much. This one you do a little bit. And this one is really going to be more deep work, um, going back to the past, going back to um, how they're relating to each other and issues that are coming up. So this one's probably the most intensive. And just to give you some examples of types of groups, I'm going to pull up this website that when I was a doctoral level intern at University of Texas, we had over 40 groups that we were offering each semester. So I'm going to pull up and show you some of these. So when I was at the Counseling Center at University of Texas, it had over 50,000 students. And if you can imagine, there might be a need for different types of group therapy, different support groups. So this is a little different because of COVID-19, but They still have a lot of groups. They have drop-in groups where people don't need to commit to the whole semester. They can just drop in and do meditation. There's drop-in discussion groups based on, these are sort of like support groups based on certain identities or certain things that they're going through, like career confusion, Black students, Latinx students, um, queer voices. These are even more identity-based support groups. These ones are not drop-in, so these ones people would have to commit to the whole semester to be a part of this group and support group. Supportive groups for transgender, non-binary students, support group for women from immigrant families, and so on. They had a lot of support groups for people who survived domestic violence and interpersonal traumas. Other types of support groups, they had eating disorder support groups. These would be psychoeducational groups where they're focused on gaining skills. So gaining skills of dealing through depression. And these are more of the actual group therapy groups where they're exploring their interpersonal relationships and interactions with others and learning more about themselves. So for this next section, we'll talk a little bit about what typical groups look like. They can range from very unstructured groups to very structured groups. So an unstructured group would not have a topic of the day, it wouldn't have anything on its agenda. It would just say, okay, what do we want to talk about? And it would leave it up to the clients in the group to discuss. Now, structured groups are opposite. They could say, okay, today we're going to talk about coping with anhedonia, a type of a symptom of depression, or they're going to talk about how to manage your anxiety through mindfulness. That would be a very structured agenda group where they have specific things they want to cover each week. So this can really vary on a continuum. There can be unstructured, semi-structured, or structured groups. Most groups typically have between 6 to 10 members. Any larger than that, it starts to lose its group format and becomes more of like a class. So ideally 6 to 10, but I've had some groups where there's only been 3 people. I've had some groups with a little bit more than 10, but that gets to be a little difficult. They typically meet once per week, generally for about an hour and a half, some for 2. And the minimum amount of time is generally like one semester, 4 to 6 months. But some groups I know have been going on for many years. There's different types of membership. So a closed group is one that once the group forms, no new members can come in. And this is because it takes a lot to adjust to the group. It takes a lot to get to know each other and become vulnerable with each other. So some groups are closed groups that, again, once you establish a group, that's the group. And the benefits of that is that you can really develop trust and vulnerability with each other because you're getting to know each other and the group members. But on the con side, there might be other people that want to join or need the group that can't join. So there's also open groups where new members can join at any time. And these could be drop-in groups or just groups that have an open setting. And when I did the domestic violence group, it was an open group. So sometimes we'd have new members, and then we had consistent members too, who would come every week. Generally, the leader needs to be somewhat directive to keep people on task. People can get off task, but they don't want to be over directive because it's not a group for them, it's a group for everyone else. So there needs to be some moderate level of directiveness. And there can be lots of different theoretical orientations, but a lot of them have humanistic or psychodynamic perspectives. There's not as many CBT groups and things like that, but that's growing. And might be more of a psycho-ed group because they're learning skills. Groups go through standard stages, and this is particularly true when it's a closed group. So these group will form, that's the first stage. The exploratory phase, or the forming stage, this is when a group gets to know each other. There's introductions. You might share what you hope to get out of the group, establishing norms and rules. Um, so everything's sort of just taking off. People are usually on their best behaviors, um, putting on a good impression. Then there's a transition phase where sometimes there's some storming and norming, is what we call it. So there might be um, people who are unhappy with the group. This would be a storming, or unhappy with members of the group. Of I expected more of them. There might be some um, sort of attitude towards the group leaders, that the group leader is not controlling enough or too much. And the group leader will really help the group work through any conflicts and negative feelings. Then there becomes the norming session where they start to establish more rules again, that people sort of get into a flow, which leads to the third stage, working or performing. This is where people are really in the work, they're doing the deep issues, working through their issues, using each other for support. There's a lot of trust and cohesion in the group. People will give and receive feedback to each other in non-defensive ways. And they're starting to translate their learning from in the group to outside the group. And then the final phase, termination or adjourning, to make it rhyme, um, is where the group is ending and people will look back. They might describe their growth, say their goodbyes, process their feelings of sadness and anxiety, their feelings of separation and loss, and then look towards the future. What are their hopes and plans for the future? So these are common stages of groups. So forming, storming and norming, performing, and then adjourning. The next few slides, we're going to talk about why group therapy works. So there are these therapeutic factors, or the things that are happening in group therapy, that makes it really effective. And Irving Yalom, who we already discussed, and we read some readings by him in the existential chapter, is also a huge group therapist, and sort of a leader in group therapy. And so he developed these factors that indicate why group counseling helps people. So these are the conditions for change, the things that are actually helping people in group therapy. The first is that there's an installation of hope. This happens because people are meeting others and hearing about others' lives, the things that other people are dealing with, and can get some hope from that. Um, this goes along with the second point, which is universality. When people are in group, they realize that we're not alone in our problems. This goes back to that existential isolation um, that we mentioned, is that group therapy actually can sort of help with that. That even though we have differences with the group members, we share some things in common. There's some universal feelings and principles that sort of help us with this existential issue. So group therapy can really be helpful in making people not feel alone. The third thing that happens in group is that people learn things. They can impart information to each other. They might say, let's say someone's working through domestic violence, and they share, okay, this is how I got out of this relationship, or this is how I kept myself safe. And in my group that I led about domestic violence, this was often something that happened, is that members would share suggestions and guidance with each other. And sometimes the group leader would too. Maybe they'd share coping strategies or something like this. So people can learn from each other in group therapy. Next, people also help each other in group therapy. And this can provide feelings of altruism, that you're actually, not only are you learning from others, but you're actually helping other people. Maybe someone's learning from you. And this feeling of, giving to others, helping other people, of altruism can really be beneficial for people in group therapy. Another thing that can happen is having a corrective experience. So if someone had a family growing up that didn't listen, that didn't pay attention to their problems, the group can sort of recapitulate this and have a new experience that people in the group are listening to their problems, are caring for them. Obviously, the group members aren't their family, but this can be a really important way for people to learn how to interact with others. That maybe their family didn't give them that, but they are now learning that other people can care. So, this corrective recapitulation of the primary family group often happens in group therapy. The next factor that makes group work helpful is that people are developing social skills in these groups, learning to ask questions, offer empathy, listen. These skills can be really helpful in people's lives, and they're developing these in the group therapy. They can imitate others' behavior. So they're learning from others, whether it's the group leader or learning from other people in their group. This is a great way to have observational learning. So, another way that they're learning is that they're getting feedback from others about their interpersonal styles. So, this is called the social microcosm. So, what's happening out in the real world is likely going to be happening in there. So, if people are passive aggressive, if people cut others off, um, are talking over someone, they can learn this that they're doing this. They might not be aware, so they might need to use some self observation and get some feedback from the group members and the group leader about what's happening. Why are they having difficulty connecting? Maybe they're putting on a happy face and don't really ever show their true emotions. So they're able to dig a little bit deeper and get feedback from other people that they might not get in the real world. For example, in the real world, someone might not tell someone else that they're, um, not a great listener. But in group therapy, they can sort of do that, give each other feedback, and process this. The ninth is group cohesiveness. So the group develops a sense of we-ness, and there's sort of a unifying um, quality about being in a group. This is similar to the therapeutic alliance, and this can be really impactful for individuals. The 10th is catharsis. So, this is a Freudian concept, but basically, um, people can express their emotions in group. They can let out their anger in a safe space. They can let out their frustrations, their sadness, their anxieties and fears. And this ability to express this to other people is beneficial. And finally, like I mentioned already, um, people can work through some of these existential factors. Um, Being in a group, they might see some similarities with others, but they'll also realize their experience is unique. And so they'll have to work through these existential issues like their basic aloneness and eventual mortality, sort of like we discussed in the existential chapters. So these are the 11 therapeutic factors that Yalom suggests um, about why group therapy works. So, the final thing to talk about with group therapy is that particular ethical issues arise. Like all therapy, there has to be informed consent so that the person knows what they're getting themselves into. In regular group therapy or in regular individual therapy, the person says, I understand that we're going to be meeting weekly, that, you know, my therapist has XYZ degree. For group, it's the same. They should know how long the commitment is. Is it for a semester? Is it for um, 8 sessions, 12 sessions? What's the commitment? What are they committing to? The time length, what is the size of the group, letting people know the general size, letting people know about the cost. These are all things that someone should do in the group screening process that I mentioned last time. So as the person meets with the group leader will go over some of these informed consent procedures. They'll also discuss confidentiality. In groups, it's impossible to guarantee confidentiality. With individual therapy, the therapist has an ethical and legal obligation to keep things private with HIPAA and confidentiality. But the other group members aren't bound by the same ethical code. The group members are just other clients. So we ask everyone in the group, what is shared in here should stay in here. However, we can't guarantee that because of the nature of groups. So confidentiality can be a little tricky. And what we encourage instead is that if people need to talk about the group, is that they don't share other people's stories or issues, but it's better to talk about what you are learning in the group. So I'm learning to be a better communicator. I'm learning to process my emotions with others. So that's how we try to have people talk about the group rather than sharing any confidential information. And we ask that if they join the group that they should keep things confidential. And then the final ethical issue to talk about with group therapy is training of the group therapists. So the therapist should have some background and training in group theory, group practice. Like I mentioned, I've had now, I guess, 3 different courses just on group therapy. And so at minimum, someone should have at least one group course or one academic course on group theory, group therapy. And they should have some training, like hands-on training, where they're observing groups, co-leading groups with another co-facilitator, interning under the supervision of someone else, so that they're not just thrown in over their heads. Because groups are very difficult to run, and there needs to be extensive training. So that wraps up group therapy, the first half of chapter 16. For the next class, I will be posting the videos for family therapy, so couples and family therapy, which is the second half of the chapter. Please let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.